But on to our top story tonight. 26 days of hectic bidding has translated into a whopping 54,000 crore rupees in revenues for the government, and we're not done yet. With the auction still going strong, what does this really mean for telecom companies? ENY's Prashant Singhal and Diamond Management and Technology consultants Vinod Nair join us now for more perspective. Also joining us, our very own Siddharth Zarabi. Siddharth, you go first. Fill us in on the day's action on the 3G front.
Day 26, the All India 3G price has risen to almost 13,500 crore, and this is despite the fact that several circles continue to see negative demand. Now that really doesn't mean too much depending on which side you are looking at, but it is 13,500 crore. The overall government revenue is 54,378 crore, rising nearly 5% today over the two preceding days, which saw almost 6.5% increases, topping 3,000 crore every day. And the key thing right now that we are picking up from our sources is that the auction is unlikely to end tomorrow. It may actually last for a day or two more. So effectively at this point of time, assuming the previous 3 days performance, we are looking at 3G bids crossing 60,000 crore, a fact that we had highlighted on this channel a few days back. That is 3G bids alone for 60,000 crore, and depending on whatever exchange rate you look at, you're talking about $12 billion at least from this account alone. So that is the big news. If you look at the circle-wise breakup, Delhi almost 2,373 crore, Bombay at 2,433 crore, and you keep going on, the prices of 3G spectrum per circle in the overall 22 circles have crossed most significant milestones that everyone expected. And clearly the issue which we have been talking about many times in the past is this going to be viable? But for that, the answers will probably come from the winning bidders themselves. Back to you.
Right, thank you, Siddharth. Prashant Singhal and Vinod Nair join in. Prashant, let me come to you. Day 26, 13,500 crores, as Siddharth's explaining, over nearly 54,300 crores being done. It's clearly exceeded everyone's expectations. Where is this going to end?
I hope it ends sooner than later, but I would think that it should end within the next 2 to 3 days, within this week, and I hope it ends on the 15,000 mark. I think as it is, it's priced beyond expectations. I think now it's more of the emotions which are playing than really the realistic business cases.
Right, Vinod, let me put that question to you because, you know, the telecom minister started off with 35,000 crores. That was what was budgeted as far as this budget was concerned. Then he moved up to 45, then 50, and then 60,000 crores. By all likelihood, the kind of gains that we have been seeing on a daily basis, it's expected to cross that figure. And we're only talking about 3G. We're not even getting into broadband wireless just so far. You know, I was talking to somebody associated with the telecom business some time ago, and in jest he said this is likely to be our subprime crisis because all of these telecom companies are working on borrowed money. Would you go as far as that?
Yeah, that's certainly a view that many hold. It's interesting, if you remember what happened in Europe after the 3G auctions, that's when telecom in Europe went through its toughest phases. A lot of telecom operators rated downwards because of the amount of money they had spent on the spectrum, but also because of the capital outlay that they had to put in place for rolling out 3G networks. And we remember distinctly that it was a very tough phase after the auctions for telcos in Europe. India, probably a different story. I think the amounts at which the auction is at today is probably higher than what most people had planned. But this is a different story from what happened in Europe many years ago. Spectrum is still very sought after. I think that's what you're essentially seeing in these auctions. It's also clear that not every circle is as attractive to the operators, and the peak concentration, so to speak, is in circles which ostensibly have the highest amount of spectrum constraints, but also have a subscriber profile where operators believe they can get the most out of their 3G licenses. So additional services, additional revenues. So surprised a little bit at the amounts where we are today, but you know, we were pretty clear that the 35,000 crore mark was going to be breached quite substantially.
Vinod, this is a question actually to Prashant also. Given the fact that we have a situation where the telecom tariffs have not been regulated by the TRAI for several years, they are on forbearance. do you think the input costs being at the level that they are, plus the capex that will be incurred, there will be regulatory intervention required for setting tariffs at a level where the industry would find it viable to offer these 3G services?
Let me take that first. We would argue strongly against the regulator stepping in to decide tariffs. I think the model works essentially on a free market competitive model. As long as we have a number of viable competitive telecom players in the market, I think the market will find its own tariff structures that are appropriate for long-term stuff. To some extent, there is regulatory intervention because termination charges are, for instance, decided and set by the regulator. There are a couple of other ways in which the regulator plays a role. But my personal point of view, there should be absolutely no influence of the regulator in setting telecom tariffs in the market, either as a result or independent of the 3G auctions.
Prashant, what are your views? Do you agree with what Vinod is saying?
Yeah, I think, Siddharth, the regulator really should not be playing any role in setting the tariffs, but clearly we would see the tariff going upwards because with the industry being at 1 paisa a second, tariffs really almost southwards. I don't think these kind of spends that the company would be doing both on the spectrum as well as on the capex to roll out the services, there would be too much sustainability because even if you look at the profile of the companies, there are just about 2 or 3 companies which are PAT positive in this industry, and still there are about 4 or 5 companies which have been in business for the last 3 to 4 years, but just about trying to get EBITDA positive, and then you have a bunch of new companies which have just started and they are nowhere near the EBITDA positive. So with these tariffs and the outlay that we are talking about for spectrum and capex, I think clearly tariffs will have to start going northwards to sustain this capex, or we go back to the NTP 99 days, which means we are again on the forefront where the industry starts bleeding.
Vinod, the quick question to you, what do you make of the data that we have seen so far? Circles like Mumbai and Delhi crossing the 2,000 crore rupee mark, but then you also have circles like West Bengal, J&K, Gujarat, Kerala, Haryana that are still seeing negative demand. So what would your takeaways be from the data that we have at this point in time?
Srini, I think this is just a reflection of the complexity of the Indian market. If you compare it to 3G auctions around the world, what you see in India is essentially an auction driven by 2G spectrum constraints as a critical part of this auction process, which was not the case for most of the 3G auctions around the world. 3G auctions around the world typically were based on what we call the upside case because of the additional revenue and the additional services that 3G could provide. In India, because of the constraints that most operators have on spectrum, the valuation of 3G spectrum has taken on a different approach. Not surprisingly, it is the metros where the spectrum constraint is most acute. Combination of reasons, and as a result, people who do not face a spectrum constraint in circles that you mentioned in some of the states are not likely to place a lot of value on the 3G spectrum because to some extent what it also reveals is they're thinking that the potential upside from offering 3G services in a circle where there's no real spectrum constraint, this upside may be somewhat limited, hence either no demand or negative demand, as you said, in some of those circles.
All right, we've been talking about this on the channel on how this really is about the spectrum, but Siddharth, the TRAI is finally unveiling its much-awaited recommendations on overall spectrum management and review of license terms and conditions on Tuesday. Now, take us through what we can really expect from the TRAI as part of that 2G guidelines.
Well, to sort of summarize it first, the report will really try and lay to rest a lot of controversies that we have seen about 2G spectrum allocation, pricing, and several other issues. Remember, with 3G being auctioned, that part is done and delivered. There are 53 questions that the TRAI asked in its consultation paper, which was issued on the 16th of October 2009. They're wide variety. If you break them up, there are basically 4 big topics. One is how to reprice spectrum and how to reform it, considering that some people have more than what the license prescribed and some people say that we have got less than what our license prescribed. The second issue really is a new policy on M&A. In a situation where you have 10 to 12 operators, how do you permit mergers and don't create a situation where a monopolistic operator emerges? The third issue really is with regard to the tenure of licenses. For instance, Bharti Airtel, which was among the first winners of licenses, has a tenure till 2015 on certain licenses, and so on and so forth. Clearly, what I'm picking up from my sources is that there will be a new spectrum reforming advice that will be given to the DoT. Remember, this entire report will only have recommendatory power, and this follows an internal exercise done by DoT last year, the Subodh Kumar committee, but then the DoT referred it to the TRAI. On pricing, I think there will be some suggestion to increase the level of charge that operators pay for spectrum beyond a particular cutoff limit, say for instance 6 megahertz. So that would perhaps mean that operators who have more than that, companies like Bharti, Vodafone, will have to pay additional if the DoT were to agree with this. Then there will be a license extension, possibly recommending an extension up to 30 years. Original license was 20 years, so clearly a 10-year extension or a license in perpetuity. And several other issues that have dogged the industry for a lot of time, including uniform license fee, are going to be recommended. Of course, for the DoT, it will mean not only taking a suo motu decision, but also consulting with the Ministry of Finance, which will want to ensure that no revenues are given away. But if these suggestions are sort of accepted by the DoT to whatever extent, at least the entire 2G issue, the overhang, will be finished, and that will be good news considering the fact that we will end up dealing with both generations of mobile phone spectrum. Back to you, Shireen.
Thanks, Siddharth, for putting that in perspective. Prashant, very quickly, you made the point about, the sustainability of the business case if this kind of investments are made. Someone we spoke to a couple of days ago said how this market is really at the bottom of the pyramid, while 3G really caters to the creamy layer or the upper end value-added services. So how then can pricing be done in a market like this when you're going to be investing huge amounts of money in buying spectrum in the first place?
Yeah, so I think the pricing, as I mentioned, the pricing is going to start moving upwards both for voice and clearly for data. We will see the pricing to be slightly on the higher side for premium services, which I know today with BSNL and MTNL on their 3G networks is available cheap, but it would start on a premium basis in order to start recovering the license fee costs and the capital outlays which are going to be inputted by most of the operators. So I think the tariffs are bound to see an uptrend because 1 paisa really is not sustainable, and with the incremental liability on the books of most of the companies for 3G, and bear in mind there would be a huge amount of interest cost that would be incurred by these companies to just fund the license fees alone. So a $3 billion license fee for a pan-India license would require close to $300 million of interest cost to be funded every year. So I don't think there is any other choice but to see the pricing going upward on voice and clearly on data, and especially on the premium data services.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. Prashant Singhal, Vinod Nair, many thanks for joining us with your perspective. Coming up next on What's